How many people do you think Swango killed?
It's estimated 60. But if you ask Swango, he doesn't even know himself, so it's kind of hard to say. Imagine killing so many people so frequently that you can't even remember who they are. I was responsible for all major criminal investigations for the VA hospital system from West Virginia to Maine. There was drug diversion, there was theft of property, there was fraud, embezzlement, bribery. I had never done a homicide case before in my life. I was traditionally a white-collar crime guy. Michael Swango was a doctor. Very interesting about Michael Swango, though, when he was in medical school, his fellow students referred to him as 00 Swango, licensed to kill. And they went to the dean and they said, you know, Dean, we don't think Michael Swango should actually be a doctor. And the dean replied, well, I don't care what you guys think, you're only students. He begins as an intern. And while he's an intern, patients seem to die unexpectedly every time they get a visit from Dr. Michael Swango. In fact, there were many suspicious incidents in that particular hospital, but they could never prove that he was actually a murderer. So after a while, he just decided to leave and go back to his old job as an EMT. He would love to respond to the worst accidents imaginable. The more gore, the more death, the better. And one day, he's talking with his coworkers and he says, you know, you guys are really great. I think I'm gonna bring in some donuts for you to enjoy. And next thing you know, all his coworkers are getting ill. They're throwing up, they're really sick. And he's calling each one of them and says, tell me all the symptoms. Tell me exactly what happened. Only to be found out later as to having poisoned these people. He went to jail for 5 years. He comes out, he changes his name a little bit, and he creates this document that says his civil rights were restored by the governor because he tells everybody, you know, I'm a tough ex-Marine, I got in a barroom brawl, I went to prison, but the governor restored my civil rights, and here's a piece of paper. And the hospital said, great, come on in. Well, the next thing you know, he's at a VA hospital out west, and everything's going well until the story hits the paper about Swango actually spending time in jail for poisoning his coworkers. Well, sooner or later, he winds up in my neighborhood out in Long Island. I get a phone call from the chief of psychiatry at the Northport VA. We have a doctor working here. His name's Michael Swango. And there's a news story about him poisoning his coworkers. So I grab somebody in my office, one of the agents, a fellow named Tom, and Tom and I go out to Long Island and say, let's chat with the guy. Let me tell you, he was the coolest. Handsome, tan, aviator sunglasses, smooth as could be. You know, if I didn't know better, I'd want to introduce him to my daughter. Because it's a handsome ex-Marine doctor. Wow, this is gonna be a great catch, right? So I start talking to him and I say, you know, doctor, there's a report going around that you actually spent time in jail for poisoning your coworkers. Is that true? Oh, no, it's not true at all, Bruce. You know, then he goes through the whole story of how he was in a barroom brawl and his civil rights restored and all of that. I said, wow. Thank you very much, doctor. You know, I really appreciate it. But just so I could satisfy my boss, we're here in your room. Can I take a look around? You know, can I just search around a little bit with your permission? And that's when his demeanor completely changed. No, thank you very much. This interview is over. Well, then I called the U.S. attorney, and I said to the U.S. attorney, you know, I'd like to get a search warrant for that room. And she says, hey, Bruce, you don't have any evidence that he harmed anybody in the Eastern District of New York. You don't have any evidence of crime, so I can't give you a search warrant. Many of these patients are seniors. They have many things wrong with them. The files were this thick. I didn't know you could have this much wrong with you and still be alive, let alone I'm supposed to prove this guy was murdered. And I said to the FBI, I said, look, we don't have any evidence of murder, but we have evidence of him lying to the government and lying on his application about really what happened to him. They had no interest in all in pursuing this. Next thing you know, Swango's gone. Where does he wind up? Zimbabwe, Africa. And when he's in Zimbabwe, Africa, he kills women and children and pregnant women. And there was an arrest warrant for him eventually in Zimbabwe. Well, he leaves Zimbabwe and he comes back to the United States because he had to renew his passport. Next stop was going to be Saudi Arabia, where he was going to do the same thing. And they got him for fraud, which was a simple case. But so what? It put him away. It put him off the streets for a short time, just enough time for us to do the investigation we needed to do. We wound up with about 3 cases that we felt really strongly these patients should not have died when they did, and they were probably administered some drug they shouldn't have been administered. Now, at the same time, we got very lucky because the United States had just signed an extradition treaty with Zimbabwe. So we said to Michael Swango, say, look, Doc, if you go to trial, and even if you win, we're just gonna put you on a plane, fly you over to Zimbabwe, and drop you off on the tarmac where there's a warrant for your arrest. Well, it didn't take him long to plead guilty as a result of that. And he did plead guilty to 3 murders and eventually pled guilty for the murder of this young student in Ohio State University, Cynthia McGee. He got 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, and then another one in Ohio State University. Medical credentialing as a result of that case has made a 180-degree turn for the better. Hospitals have staffs of people who review medical credentialings, who verify everything on a doctor's resume because they don't want to ever see another Michael Swango case in the United States again. My advice to everyone, if you suspect something like this is happening, is not to leave the patient alone. To have somebody who politely questions the nurse or the doctor as to what's going on and what's being administered. And a medical serial killer is going to say, oh, there's so many other people here who don't have family, who don't have visitors. I'm not going to pick on this man or woman.